The notification never came. Maya had been staring at her phone for 3 days straight, watching the little bubble that said read underneath her last message, feeling her heart crack a little more with each passing hour. She had poured everything into those words, confessed feelings she'd buried for months, and Connor had simply vanished into digital silence. What she didn't know was that while she was breaking apart in her Seattle apartment, he was driving 23 hours straight through rain, snow, racing against time in his own fear to tell her something that couldn't be said through a screen. It had started 6 months earlier at a mutual friend's wedding in Portland. Maya had been the maid of honor, Connor the best man, and somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the last dance, they discovered something neither expected. She was a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could light up a room, someone who believed in handwritten notes and random acts of kindness. He was a software engineer from Austin, quiet and thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered small details about people that everyone else forgot. They talked until sunrise that night, sharing dreams and fears and stories that felt too personal for strangers but perfect for whatever they were becoming. The next 6 months had been a blur of text messages, late-night video calls, and carefully planned visits whenever their schedules aligned. Maya would finish her 12-hour shifts at Seattle Children's Hospital and find voice messages from Connor waiting for her. His Texas drawl making her smile even on the hardest days. He'd send her photos of sunsets from his apartment balcony, articles he thought she'd like, playlists titled things like For When You Need to Believe in Magic. She'd ship him care packages with his favorite coffee and handwritten letters that he kept in a drawer by his bed. Everyone who knew them said they were perfect for each other. Everyone except Connor's ex-girlfriend, who had reappeared in his life with impeccable timing and devastating news. If you believe in second chances, in the power of showing up when it matters most, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below about a time someone surprised you when you needed it most. Your story might inspire someone else today. Maya had finally decided to tell Connor the truth 3 days ago. She couldn't do the casual thing anymore, couldn't pretend that her feelings weren't consuming her every waking thought. She typed and deleted the message 17 times before finally hitting send at 2 in the morning. I know this might change everything, but I can't keep pretending. I'm falling in love with you, Connor. Actually, I think I already have. I know the distance is complicated and we never defined what this is, but I needed you to know. You mean more to me than I ever planned for someone to mean. She'd watched the message go from delivered to read within minutes, had seen those 3 dots appear and disappear a dozen times, and then nothing. Just silence that felt louder than any rejection could have been. What Maya couldn't have known was that Connor had read her message while sitting in his car outside his ex-girlfriend's apartment. Rachel had called him 2 weeks earlier, her voice shaking as she told him she was sick, really sick, and that she had no one else to turn to. She had leukemia, needed someone to help her through chemotherapy, and her family had cut her off years ago after a falling out Connor had witnessed firsthand. They'd dated for 3 years, had talked about marriage, and even though it had ended badly 18 months ago, Connor couldn't ignore someone's cry for help. He'd been going to her appointments, sitting with her during treatments, wrestling with guilt and obligation and confusion about what the right thing to do actually was. When Maya's message came through, Connor had been staring at it for hours, his thumb hovering over the keyboard, trying to find words that could explain the impossible situation he was in. How could he tell the woman he was falling for that he was spending his days with his ex-girlfriend without it sounding like exactly what it wasn't? How could he explain that his silence wasn't rejection, but rather the paralysis of someone trying to be a good person in a situation with no good answers? Rachel had fallen asleep on his couch after a particularly brutal treatment session, and Connor had sat in his car reading Maya's message over and over, feeling like he was being torn in 2 directions by 2 different versions of what being a decent human being meant. He'd started typing responses 100 times. I feel the same way, but I need to explain something. Delete. You have no idea how much your message means to me, but the timing is complicated. Delete. I'm in love with you too, and I'm so sorry for what I'm about to tell you. Delete. Every version felt insufficient. Every explanation felt like an excuse, and the longer he waited, the worse the silence became. He knew Maya well enough to know what his lack of response would do to her, how she'd internalize it and blame herself and build walls around her heart to protect it from further damage. He knew, and yet he still couldn't find the words. By the second day of silence, Connor had made a decision. Some things were too important to be said through text messages or phone calls. Some conversations required eye contact and physical presence, and the vulnerability of standing in front of someone without the safety net of a screen to hide behind. He'd arranged for a home health aide to check on Rachel, had called his boss to request emergency time off, and had started driving. 23 hours from Austin to Seattle straight through, fueled by gas station coffee and the growing certainty that if he didn't do this now, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Maya spent those 3 days going through every stage of grief. She deleted their text thread and then restored it from the trash folder. She wrote angry messages she never sent, crafted dignified responses that dissolved into desperate pleas before being deleted. She told herself she was fine and then cried in the hospital bathroom between patient rounds. Her best friend Sarah had come over on the third night, bringing wine and ice cream and the kind of tough love that only best friends can deliver. Maybe he's just scared, Sarah had said. Maybe he's processing. Maybe there's an explanation. But Maya had shaken her head, already building the walls she'd need to move forward. Or maybe I finally put myself out there and got exactly what I should have expected. Maybe I was just a distraction for him, and now that it got real, he's gone. She'd just finished telling Sarah that she was done, that she was going to delete his number and move on with her life, when there was a knock at her door. It was almost midnight on a Thursday, and Maya wasn't expecting anyone. She'd walked to the door in her pajamas, eyes still red from crying, hair pulled into a messy bun, looking nothing like the put-together version of herself she'd want anyone to see. She'd looked through the peephole and felt her heart stop completely. Connor was standing in her hallway, looking like he'd been through a war. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, his clothes wrinkled from days of wear, and he was holding a bouquet of sunflowers that looked slightly wilted from the journey. For a moment, neither of them moved. Maya's hand was frozen on the doorknob, her mind trying to reconcile the silence of the past 3 days with the physical reality of him standing there. Connor stood perfectly still, as if afraid that any sudden movement would shatter whatever fragile chance he had. When she finally opened the door, the words tumbled out of him before she could speak. I didn't text back because I couldn't figure out how to explain. This in words. My ex-girlfriend has cancer. She has no one, and I've been helping her through treatment because I couldn't just abandon someone who's terrified and alone. I should have told you. I know I should have, but I didn't know how to without it sounding like I was making excuses or asking for permission or any of the things that weren't what was actually happening. And then you sent me that message, that perfect, brave, beautiful message, and I realized that you deserved more than my cowardice. You deserve someone who would show up, not just send words through a screen. So I drove here, 23 hours, because I'm in love with you too, Maya. I have been since that first night in Portland when you told me about the kid you'd spent 3 hours trying to make laugh after his surgery. I'm in love with you, and I'm terrified, and I'm sorry I made you doubt that for even a second. Maya had listened to every word, tears streaming down her face, her heart doing something complicated that felt like breaking and healing at the same time. Sarah had quietly slipped out, giving them space, and Maya had finally found her voice. You drove 23 hours to tell me this. You couldn't have just called? But she was smiling through the tears, and Connor had smiled back, exhausted and hopeful. Some things are too important for phone calls. Some things require showing up in person, even when you're scared of what might happen when you do. They'd talked through the night, sitting on her couch as Connor explained everything. About Rachel's diagnosis, about his guilt and confusion, about how helping her through treatment didn't mean he had romantic feelings, but rather that he couldn't live with himself if he turned his back on someone suffering. About how every moment with Rachel had made him more certain of his feelings for Maya, how being there for someone from his past had clarified exactly who he wanted in his future. Maya had listened, had asked questions, had He'd been honest about her hurt and her fears, and her own doubts about whether she could handle the complexity of the situation. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the kind of love that shows up even when it's hard, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to believe in real connection today. I can't promise this will be easy, Connor had said as dawn light started filtering through her windows. I have a commitment to help Rachel through her treatment, and I won't abandon that. But I can promise that you're not second choice or backup plan or anything less than the person I want to build a life with. If you can trust me through this complicated season, I will spend every day proving that your trust wasn't misplaced. Maya had looked at this man who had driven across the country because some things couldn't be said through a screen, who was asking her to be brave enough to love him through uncertainty, and had made a choice that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. Before we finish, comment below with a heart emoji if you believe in showing up for the people you love. I'm scared, Maya had admitted. I'm scared of getting hurt, of being the understanding girlfriend while you spend time with someone from your past. Of all the ways this could go wrong. Connor had taken her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. I'd rather show up and risk everything than hide behind silence and lose what we could be. And in that moment, with exhausted honesty replacing easy promises, they'd chosen each other. Not perfectly, not without fear or doubt or the complicated reality of human relationships, but with the kind of intentionality that transforms a connection into something real. Connor stayed in Seattle for 5 days, met her friends, visited her at the hospital, and helped her understand, through actions, what words had failed to convey. When he drove back to Austin, they had a plan, they had honesty. They had the beginning of something built not on convenience or fantasy, but on the harder, more beautiful foundation of showing up when it mattered most. Months later, after Rachel had finished her treatment and moved closer to her estranged family for support, after Maya and Connor had navigated difficult conversations and small betrayals of fear and the slow building of trust, after he'd relocated to Seattle and they'd learned what it meant to love someone through the messy reality of life and not just the highlight reel, Maya would still think about that night he showed up at her door. She'd think about how silence had almost cost them everything, and how the courage to be vulnerable in person had saved what could have been lost forever. She'd learned that sometimes the best love stories aren't about perfect timing or easy circumstances, but about people who choose to show up even when it's hard, who drive 23 hours because some conversations are too important for screens, who prove through actions that you matter more than comfort or convenience or fear. And Connor would still keep those handwritten letters in his drawer, would still remember that the woman he'd almost lost through silence had been worth every mile of that desperate drive north, had been worth choosing brave over safe, presence over protection. Because in the end, he hadn't just texted back. He'd shown up in person. And that had made all the difference.